I'm Dudu Mkhwanazi and I'm a digital inclusion advocate. I'm passionate about connecting South Africans and low-income communities, particularly girls, to the internet and using internet as a powerful and empowering tool. I'm the eldest of 5. I grew up in Thokoza. I was raised by my grandmother, and I've always been pushed to read quite a lot, particularly by my dad. So I was always reading Your Mills and Booms and any other book I could get my hands on. I remember my grandmother saying I was 4 years old and I would try to read the Coke bottle, and at that time I couldn't read English, so I would say Coca-Cola instead of Coca-Cola. But that's where my love for reading started, and I then finished high school. My parents didn't have money to send me to university, and I remember sobbing to my grandmother and saying I want to go study at a university and not at an FUT college. I mean, there's a huge stigma attached to studying at an FUT college. It's a terrible one, but there is. And I recall one morning we drove to the Val, and we came to this university, and I was a late register, obviously, and we didn't have money, and my grandmother decided on that day she's going to take her life savings and pay for my first year at university. Days at university, particularly in the Val Triangle, were very interesting. I was under a lot of pressure not to fail any of my modules, because my first year no one was paying for my studies but my grandmother, and I had to work very hard to at least get a scholarship or bursary. And whilst doing that, I realized the importance of a student life. And I met some really cool, interesting young people with similar backgrounds, with also single mothers, but who were also passionate about, being active and engaging with other young people. And that's when it hit me, when I was in the Val, that we're basically, and this is my mantra in life, we're all here to be of service to each other. And if we are to pick something that we do on a daily basis that we regard as a job, it ought to be something that allows us to be of service to others on a daily basis. And that's where my love for politics then came in. But I was already enrolled as a political science student, and just sitting on the desk and studying politics for me was just not enough. So I had that hunger. I want to be involved. I want to know what it's like to lead. And a couple of friends of mine kept saying, you're not that nerd. If you give it a try, you could actually win an election. And I remember a good friend of mine, Dumiso, Hade, was saying, SASCO's looking for a candidate. I'm pretty sure they could recruit you. And I thought, do I want to stand under a banner for a political party? So I decided, hey, let's do it. And I won, and I got in student leadership. And suddenly, it just opened a different world to me, but also a world where anything is possible. You're not only leading students, but you're helping shape the university's policies, your community's perspective on this university. And those were quite shaping and incredible years of my life, because had it not been for that opportunity to be involved in student leadership, I don't think I would have plucked up the courage and the confidence to think, hey, a girl from Katlehong could find herself in the middle of France and participate in this master's program and compete with other European counterparts. And that's when it all started for me. I was the first in my family, in my immediate family, to go to a university. And I would then become the first in my family to be a CEO, and the first in my family to go and study abroad.
How much French do you speak?
Un peu. Little did I know, 2 years later, I'd find myself in the middle of Paris. And luckily, I was enrolled for a bilingual program at the University of Montpellier in the south of France. So it was half French, half English. But when the French say bilingual, they mean 80% French. And I was the only English-speaking student in the class. Well, there was another young lady from Russia, but she had been in France for the last 2 years, so she could get by with enough French. And it took me 6 months to get comfortable. I remember I wouldn't even go shopping alone. I'd need a translator to come with me. And my supervisor and research supervisor said to me on my first day when I was at the university, he said, you're in France, you speak French. You will do everything the French do, from makeup to coffee to jogging to gossiping, you will do as the French do. And I took it very seriously. And Project Isizwe is a non-for-profit that advocates as well as facilitate the deployment of free Wi-Fi infrastructure in low-income communities. Our vision and mission, we believe that internet access should be subsidized in a certain portion, and it should be within a walking distance for every South African, particularly in low-income communities. Unfortunately, I did not find Project Isizwe. I think I would have, but I was probably somewhere in France trying to analyze policy. So in 2013, Alan Nordcraig Jr. Tells the story of he's looking at his daughter and they're sitting outside a restaurant and he sees another kid just about the same age as his daughter, and he realizes how his daughter turns out and how this kid turns out does not necessarily have anything much to do with this kid growing up in Guguletu and his daughter growing up in Stellenbosch. It has everything to do with access, and that his daughter already has this advantage because of access to the internet, and that's already put his daughter a step in at the door. So he then sells the idea to a couple of municipalities, and in 2013 the municipality of Tshwane, the council, buys into the idea that people of Tshwane need to be connected within a walking distance. Now this is during the wake of now UP and UNISA putting all their study information online. And so Isizwe starts in partnership with the city of Tshwane, and they install 25 hotspots, which grows into 50 hotspots, which grows into 200 hotspots, which grows into 1,050 hotspots. And at that time, we're now connecting 600,000 people a week to the internet. And I mean, we were pretty much running our own broadcaster and no one had thought of it. No one had thought of internet access as a public utility, right? Suddenly, connectivity is put to match with water and electricity for citizens of Tshwane. And we were the pioneers of that. I always say what makes us different from any other ordinary big telco is that we not only facilitate, so when Project Isizwe started, we would have our own cherry pickers who would go and do the deployments. And then we realized we're not trading in that space. And in fact, we need to be empowering small businesses and local businesses. So what we do is, if let's say you are a sponsor and you want to connect a community center and a library and a school, we would then be the buffering partner. We would then go and source out the local ISP operating in the area and say to him, listen, I as a sponsor, he's got X amount, he wants to bring in connectivity. You already have a mask here, you have the connectivity. Instead of us building our own towers, you know, you have the responsibility to connect your community. You already have existing infrastructure. How much will it cost? And usually because of our non-for-profit status, we're able to bring the cost down. It's very expensive to connect townships. And so if you, you know, it's the same reason why it's people using prepaid in low-income communities that suffer the most from the cost of data, right? The richer you are, the cheaper it is for you to afford anything, right? So, I mean, with me personally, I spend about 350 Rand on a 20 gig, on a 20 meg throughput, uncapped data at my house, right? And I go to visit my aunt and Vosloorus, and my cousin says, you have to put Wi-Fi, because everyone in my family thinks I carry Wi-Fi everywhere I go. You have to put Wi-Fi here at our home. And I call my internet service provider and I ask him, how much will it cost for me to put an in-house router at my aunt's house? This guy says, well, there's no line of sight there, so that means we'll have to like go and look for an infrastructure and you know, so he's putting all these things, and at the end of the day he sends me an invoice of about 40 grand. I mean, for one household. It's ridiculous, because one, in townships there's no fiber, right? There's very little, if no fiber at all. And we're no longer talking about fiber. Let's talk about wireless. Why is it expensive to get wireless? Because a lot of telcos are white owned and they're operating in affluent areas. So again, going to the township is considered a business risk. So how do I know this client in the township is going to pay me? There's no logic into it, but unfortunately that's where people in low income communities operate. That's why you get very few houses that are connected in-house, without, maybe if you are not connected to a telecom line or you have a router at your house. But I've always maintained that there's no spectrum issue in Mamelodi, right? There's a spectrum issue here in Rosebank because we're all on LTE and we're all on smartphones and more affordable. We don't have a spectrum issue. We have a monopoly issue, what we have in South Africa. We're not talking about the elephant in the room. That one, there aren't a lot of black-owned telcos in the country, right? So if you go to ICASA and you ask for a list of telcos that have registered for a license with ICASA, I doubt you'll even get to 50 that are black owned. I see Isizwe partnering with your private corporates who operate within the space not very far from these low income communities and using their CSI budget to connect these communities and working with us to then find a sustainable revenue model, because you would really have to have deep pockets to fund this for eternity. And really, I see that as phase one, us partnering with private corporates and other non-for-profits that are realizing that the world has moved towards digitalization. And if you want to come and disrupt and do an intervention program in the community, it has to be online, right? But you also have the responsibility, if you want to get the accurate data and want to have accurate impact, to then help connect the community to extract data from the community. But phase two for us is we continue advocating and hopefully get to a point where we've advocated enough that it's now everyone can get internet connectivity within the comfort of their own homes and in low-income communities. Because I feel that that's phase two, that Isizwe no longer has to connect people within a walking distance. Now everyone wakes up and they're connected. And that's where we now have the discussion around putting smart meters in the township. And not saying we'll have Joburg to be a smart city and just connecting only affluent areas. Let's have a smart city and let's have Alex to be a smart city. But my grandmother needs to be able to connect to the internet and her smart grid from the comfort of her own home. And she can only do that if internet is affordable or wireless is affordable in the township. So that's phase two of where Isizwe is. And once we accomplish that in partnership with the government and other telcos, I think we've solved a lot of our problems.